Well, welcome. I think this is going to be a pretty fun video, actually. Even before I hit the record button, I was getting kind of that sense of nostalgic euphoria that you get when you revisit a part of your childhood. In this case, that part of my childhood is a toy that I used to play with all the time. And if you're from my generation, and possibly from the kids of my generation, you know what this toy is. It's called the Spirograph. And I've laser cut out a version of that Spirograph that I'm playing with right now. And all the Spirograph is a set of gears like this on a circle or sometimes some other shapes with little holes cut into it so you can slide your pen or pencil in there and run it around a bigger gear that you have and make some pretty cool shapes out of it, kind of like this one. Well, we're going to take that nostalgic toy from my childhood and combine it today with the big boy toys that I play with now here in the shop. See if we can't make some of these patterns, but in wood. Before I do that, let's take a look at how I put this one together. Now, I was in middle school when Stephen Hawking's famous book came out, A Brief History of Time. And I remember reading it at the time and going through the prologue where he stated that his publisher told him that for every math equation that he put into his book, he would lose half of his readers. And I recognize that if I put a math equation into this video or talk about the math, it's possible I could lose half of my viewers as well. But to do this particular bit of work required a little bit of math, and it required a little bit of coding here on the computer. And so I would like to explain that a little bit. If you don't want to go through the math and that's the kind of thing that doesn't interest you and you just want to see the woodworking and the creation of this tool, I do put chapter markers into all my videos. Go ahead and skip by one. But if you're interested in how I put all of this together, I'm going to do a quick explanation here on the computer. What you see here is the template that I generated for the gears to spin around. Fortunately, the math to do this is the kind of math that you learned in middle school. And I am releasing this video on March 14th, which is Pi Day. So we're going to be using pi a little bit here. Now I want my circle of gears to have a diameter of 8 inches, which means that it will have a radius of 4 inches. In order to know where to place the gears, I need to know the circumference. The circumference is equal to 2 pi times the radius. I also want the spacing of the teeth of my gears to be the same both on the wheel of the template and the discs. So I represent that distance by the variable d, and I'm going to set that to 1/4 of an inch. Once I've figured out my circumference and I know how big my teeth are going to be, I simply divide that circumference by d, and I get the number of teeth that I'm going to have in the template. Unfortunately, this didn't work out to an integer number, and I can't have half of a tooth, so I need to take that 100.5 and actually reduce it down to 100. Once I know that my teeth are going to be exactly 100, I actually need to go back now and figure out what my radius and circumference are going to be, given that I only have 100 and not 100.5 teeth. So far, I've been measuring the space between my teeth in inches, but they can also be measured in degrees. I know that I have 100 teeth, and I know that a circle has 360 degrees. So the number of degrees between the spacing of my teeth is going to be 360 degrees divided by 100, which means 3.6 degrees. The last step for me to generate these gears is I need to find out where the points of those teeth actually line up on an XY axis. To do that, I need to switch from middle school math to high school math. To figure out the X and Y coordinate, I just draw a line from the center point to where that tooth is going to be. That gives me a right triangle, and I can use some simple trigonometry functions to find the equation for where X and Y are going to be based on the number of teeth that I've gone up multiplied by the distance between them in degrees, which is 3.6. The same equations can be used to determine the points of the teeth. All that's needed is to use a new radius by subtracting out the height of the teeth, then use half of the 3.6 degrees to figure out the angle. That's everything that I need to know in order to create this circle for the template, and it turns out that creating gears is exactly the same way. I just keep the distance between the teeth the same, and I simply use a smaller radius. This Spirograph template here that I created for the beginning of the video was created out of 1/8 inch acrylic. That's what this is here, and it makes it work really well with a pen that doesn't have to stick too far through. But the router is a different story if we're going to go into wood. And my first thought was that I would simply take one of these gears that make up the Spirograph, and I'd just turn it into a base plate. And then I could just rotate the router around with little gears on its base plate. But I thought after a little while that maybe that didn't make a lot of sense. That means I would be twisting it a lot. And in particular, if you happen to have a vacuum attachment onto your router, that would twist up and it wouldn't work at all. So my second thought was, why don't I take one of these discs, thicken it up into the 1/4 inch acrylic, cut it out from there, and simply enlarge the little holes that I used to stick my pencil through and make it large enough so that it actually fits into a template bushing guide. Now this particular one is 3/8 of an inch across, and so I'm going to make a hole that's roughly 3/8 of an inch. Might need to be just a little bit bigger so it doesn't bind. Also, I have a plunge bit in here right now, which is a 1/4 inch bit. But what I think I want to do instead is to get a V-shaped bit like this one and do a groove inside of there so that I can actually control, if I came back and sanded it, just how thick that particular line is going to be. It also will create a little less dust as we work, a little less friction. So that's the plan. I'm going to cut some new gears out of 1/4 inch. I'm going to see if it will work with this 1/8 inch template that I have already. If not, I'll cut one of those out at 1/4 inch as well. Let's see how that goes. The laser cutter gets to turn the math into reality as it cuts our discs. All right, let's see how that turned out. Yeah, there's very little friction on that. I think that's going to work. It's all cut out now. I've got the 1/4 inch gear going into the 1/8 inch template, and I think that should work just fine. Now, I don't trust the tape for doing this. I also don't trust myself quite yet, so I want to start on a piece of plywood, just a scrap piece of plywood that I have. And I'm going to use this hot glue to glue down the template, and then we're going to take the router and we're going to start working our way around. Okay, I'm glad we started on this plywood because this is harder than I thought it would be. It actually turns really easily. When the router is out away from the edge, it turns really easily, but when I get really close like that to the edge, I'm having a hard time pushing it. And so it's easier if I can get in there and kind of push that to get it started back again until it gets close again. And then I need to give it a push, but that's a little bit hard because it turns out when in that particular hole, the edge of my router base plate is right up against this. So I'm thinking what I might try and do is actually cut a gear that's a little bit bigger than this to help me as I make the pattern as I go through. So I'm going to try that next, and we'll do it again on the plywood before we move on. This shot shows what a terrible job I did with the smaller gear, which is the larger shape that you see here. The smaller shape was done with the larger gear, and I actually quite like it. Before I move on to a piece of hardwood though, I'd like to give it at least one more test. And that one more test resulted in a shape that looks like this. Alright, so that was much better, a lot easier to do with the bigger ones. I tried again with the little tiny one and it's still pretty difficult. The cool thing is this pattern's actually really neat. There's kind of this 4-leaf clover thing with the star in the middle, and then there's these buds coming out when I did the second one. I want to do that again without all this mess that I created behind it. And I have this piece right here. This is a piece of poplar from the inlay video I did. It was my last video. I'm going to try and do that replicate the good parts of this onto this new piece here. So I popped the template off of the plywood and I glued it down to the poplar board. And I do want to explain the little trick that you have to do in order to get this pattern right. I'm using 2 different holes on the same gear to create this pattern, but I have to get those gears lined up just right so that they align in the end. And to do that, I just traced the gears with my fingers a little bit before I did the actual cutting to make sure everything was in the right place. All right, I think I'm having a little too much fun with this. I'm going to leave this one the way it is. I like that particular pattern. I even like that it's indented in that way. But I have one more trip down nostalgia lane for you. Now, if you were one of those people that did play with the Spirograph in the generation that I did, the other thing that you'll remember beyond doing little things on paper like this is you'll remember that black magic paper that you would take your pen on as you were scribing it around, and it didn't come out the color of your pen. You were actually taking that black surface off the top and you were getting a rainbow color underneath. Well, I'm going to try and replicate that. I don't have any of that black paper, but I happen to have a dark piece of wood here, this little piece of Peruvian walnut that I've had cut off from another project. I'm going to try and create a shape, something like this. Let's see if I can't insert a rainbow into it. See how that goes. All right, colors of the rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, right? Something like that. Throw indigo in there and you're fine. I've just mixed all of those up. I don't actually want these mixing together, so we're going to give them about 15-20 minutes to set up a little bit more, then we'll start pouring them in. Now my plan from the outset here is just to take the colors and put them in little dots around the whole pattern, similar to the way it would look on that magic paper. But what I'm starting to realize as I'm doing this is I can't see these colors as I'm pouring them into this dark wood. So while I'm not aborting the plan here, I am changing to a backup plan in case it doesn't work. And that backup plan is to no longer leave the original piece just with the grooves in it, but to do the rainbow approach also on it. My hope is if the colors don't show up on the dark piece, they will show up on the lighter one. I gave it 24 hours to set up and then I sanded it down. Well, our Spirograph project is complete. And I will say that the original plan certainly didn't come out as intended. You can't really see any colors in this. It's a cool pattern, but it's definitely not the magic paper experiment that I had hoped it would be. Fortunately, the impromptu backup plan did pretty well. So here we go with that shape that I really liked from the original. And I used the exact same technique on this that I did there, but because it's the lighter colored wood, the colors came out and we've got that great rainbow pattern to it. This is quite a bit of fun. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider hitting the like button or subscribing to the channel and see some more fun projects coming up. And for those of you who are watching on the day that I release, happy Pi Day.